Welcome back to Hot Topics. This evening we are so excited. We have some guests, as you can see, and we'll be speaking on male privilege. Now, this is going to be a two-part series. So we're going to be looking this week at some of the stuff surrounding male privilege, and then next week we're going to be looking at a slightly different perspective on male privilege. So I think before we get started, we can start this side. Can we just go around, say your name, and just maybe the context in which you're finding yourself in, where you're speaking from, and then we'll get into the rest of the topic.
Okay, so my name is Nangamso Mangai, and I'm probably going to approach the topic from a corporate perspective, but also with slight experiences in my daily life as a Christian and as a black woman in South Africa in 2020.
Nan, I'm with you. We're all waiting for 2021, I think. It's like, that's where we'd like to live. I'm Jackie, and I'm a minister of religion. And I'm going to speak a little bit from my own experience, and really as a Methodist minister, as a woman, and just from some of my theological thoughts. And so that's where I'm going to approach the topic of male privilege.
My name is Siyabulela Tono Noah. I work for the Methodist Church of Southern Africa at the Mission Unit. Part of my role is around thinking through what are some of the structural drivers of gender-based violence within our Southern African context. So in that work, I've had to grapple with what being a man is and what violence is and all those things. So that's the kind of insight I think I present to this conversation.
Great. My name is Rebecca. I am a volunteer at Gracepoint. I'm coming from I've grown up with a very female-orientated household, a very female-orientated church. So that is where I'm coming from. And then only much later in life did I, in university, looking back now, maybe not, but university was I really struck with the fact that women are definitely seen as second-rate citizens. So that is the context that I'm speaking from.
Hey everyone, my name's Ilse. I work a lot with younger children and with youth, and so today I'm going to be taking the angle of looking at male privilege from a perspective of how society is structured and what are we teaching children as they grow up about male privilege.
Hi everyone, my name is Hlonile Pele, part of the Hot Topics team, and I will be probably looking at this through my own experiences, the lens of my own experiences, one as a male, but as one who's also witnessed how male privilege can go bad and can distort society and the well-being of the people around that particular male.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to be looking at different aspects today of male privilege, and so we want to maybe speak about the historic origins of male privilege and what our understanding of it from where it began. And I can imagine, actually I know that it's quite difficult to speak about that in terms of like how do we can't pinpoint the day male privilege began, but we can first of all pinpoint our personal experiences of when we first experienced male privilege, and then maybe as society, when society kind of experienced male privilege. So Nan, do you want to start us off with maybe when you first, and kind of your understanding of the historicalness of male privilege?
Okay, so I'm an only child, and my parents raised me to be human and not a girl or a boy. Mm-hmm. So I think perhaps I was slightly sheltered from that experience until I would imagine late primary school or even high school, where suddenly you're choosing sports, and there's sports that are for girls and sports that are for boys. And I'm thinking, I don't want to do needlework. I want to go do woodwork. And, starting to realize that. But I think as one grew older, it starts being more prevalent. in certain instances. So I'm originally from a very small town in KZN called Kokstad. And you then would see, for example, at family gatherings where the men get dished up for first. It doesn't matter the fact that you're both starving, you both arrived at the same time at the function, but the men must eat first. So that was really my own first experience of it, of that, the difference or in treatment that we receive as women.
So it's actually difficult to kind of pinpoint a moment, but so I grew up in a family. My grandmother had come to South Africa with her mother and father. She was 9 years old, and she'd come from Wales with her sister. Her sister was 9 years older than her, and the whole. So there were these two sisters. And they would speak this really, Welsh is a very Celtic language. And so everything was about family. And there was this complete focus in on family. And they, obviously, because they were the only two people that were related to one another in the country, everything had to happen with them and their children. And then, obviously, we were born from their children. And so we just had this constant gathering. So we were always gathered as a family. I didn't know that you actually never gathered as a family. And when I think back, particularly in not every white cultural expression, but certainly that is quite a rare thing. So we all gathered. And on my grand's side, and although my gran was the younger, she was the matriarch, which was really interesting because she was a lot younger. There were lots more girls than boys, and we used to gather, and I remember kind of only realizing that there were different things because there was this garage and the men would go and talk in the garage, and we would be playing in the day. And all of a sudden, the girls didn't go and talk in the garage. It was like, but why don't we talk in the garage? And the men would do men things. They would be drinking and talking and da 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 da. So, and the women would be cooking in the kitchen. And so there's this you observe it, and you have this almost level ground in play, and then the nights seem to separate you. So I think that would be my very first memory. And then you you observe and you slot in. You observe and you slot in. And there's something in you that kind of feels, it's not actually, it doesn't connect, inside of me. But yet you kind of have to socialize. So I must say it was also fun being with the women actually, but I didn't like the idea of being excluded.
Well, my first experience of it, I think, of male privilege was in childhood, growing up with a lot of female cousins. I think I was, within my family, there were about 3 males, and I was the 33% of that male population. And I realized that come Saturday mornings when the family does its cleaning and household chores and all those things, I was mainly exempt from it because I'll just go and play outside and enjoy whatever I want to do. And so from that, I kind of got an exposure that perhaps rules are not the same for everyone. Social rules are not the same for everyone. And of course, you're growing up in the rural Eastern Cape. So when in the community there are people, there are community events, you kind of see the decorum and the rules of engagement, and I kind of you assimilate. Just like Gary said, you kind of, even though you know that this kind of doesn't make sense, but you become part of that. And I think historically, as to where it started, it's a very difficult space to pinpoint, because it all boils down to how society organizes itself, and throughout history, and so the way a society organizes itself is particularly dependent on its worldview, its fundamental beliefs. So from that kind of perspective, where it comes from, if you look at where studies, there are some scholars that argue that within the African worldview, there hasn't, all these divisions all these shape organizations of societies that create divisions are really something new within the African experience. And by new, I mean their colonial sort of introduction. And preceding to that, there's a long history of in Africa that had a different worldview, which was then interrupted by the arrival of colonialism, which then meant that in Africa there's a kind of a special kind of worldview made up of how society has been shaped by the colonial interruption. So I think those are some of the conversations that hopefully we'll get to deal with as we have this conversation.
So I think that for me, it is quite difficult to pinpoint the first time that I really experienced male privilege almost, or was I don't know what word, like I didn't experience it, but it was around me. So I was in school, I think. I went to a private school, a really well-known private school, and I remember we always had to wear skirts. Girls always had to wear skirts, which in itself is absolutely ridiculous. But that has changed now. I think that was the last time I wore a skirt. But so we used to be sitting, and it's so uncomfortable to cross your legs all day. So sometimes you just wouldn't. You just wouldn't cross your legs. And teachers would say, "Come on, ladies, that's not very ladylike." And I think that was the first time I really experienced it, because I guess I would want to know, what is ladylike then? You know, there is this I've never dressed in your normal, like how you would expect girls to always dress. And then for a long time, I thought that made me unique, and it made me rival other women. And that's what I realized is also something else with male privilege, is that women are pitted up against women from such a young age. And for the longest time, I thought it was women's fault. But actually, what I've realized is that there's almost this like thing that this joy that people get from seeing women against women. So it's like, well, you know how we used to think when guys would compliment us and they'd say, "You're just not like other girls." And the truth is that I want to be like other girls. Like, how in the world do you think that is a compliment, that I'm not like other girls? And they begin this like rivalry for women against women. And I think, anyway, so I think that was the first time. And then in university, there were 3 of us studying theology. And I remember someone said to me, "Oh, so, you know, on your first day of university," you said, "Oh, so why are you studying theology?" And I would always, "Well, I want to be a pastor one day." And this is actually credit to my mom, that I never thought I couldn't be a lead pastor. My mom's been a lead pastor my whole life. I never thought I couldn't be. So when I was asked again, "Oh, is it because you want to go into children's ministry?" I was like, "No, not at all." And then it was, "Oh, is it because your husband or partner's in ministry and you want to like be better for them?" And eventually I got to a point where I was like assertive. I was like, "No, I want to be a pastor. That is the only reason I want to be in ministry." And people were always so bold, like completely shocked that I would want to do that. You know, so I would say that I think that those experiences in school, being told to be more ladylike, or the experiences at university, I think those are the experiences where I first realized. And I guess actually just on what Sia was saying quickly on the historical stuff of male privileges, I was watching this film called Little Women a while ago with my mom. And okay, it's problematic because I think it shows a whole bunch of white women and how they were oppressed, when the truth is you can still be oppressed and still be an oppressor. As a white woman, I am oppressed because of my gender, but I'm privileged because of my skin color. So I think it's important to say that Nan and I and Ilse, and we will all experience different types of male privilege. Nan will experience it on a completely more traumatic level than Ilse and I will. And my mom will, sorry. So sorry. And then my mom will. But my point was that in Little Women, they they speak about how you only become worthy when a man loves you. You only become worthy when you're in marriage, And I guess that I do have a fiance, but before that, I think people would always say to me, I don't know, Ilse, and I don't know if you got this before, would be like, so have you met the lucky man, or have you met the one? And I was always like, why does that actually have to equate any sense of accomplishment? So sorry, I've spoken so much. Ilse.
I think it's a good point you raise. I think one of my first experiences, and I think we've all kind of said together that it's not one pinpoint experience, but that it's a collection. And I loved what you explained, Jackie, about like slotting in. So when I started preschool, and I remember on my first day of grade 0, I think it's called grade R now, my mom dressed me in this, so my family is German, and the traditional dress is a dirndl, and it's this beautiful dress, and my mom dressed me in one first day of school to go to school and get told I'm not allowed to wear a skirt. I got told I'm not allowed to wear a skirt because the boys would look up my skirt when we were swinging. And so instead of correcting the behavior of the boys, we corrected the behavior of the girls by telling them they couldn't do something. And I think there's an aspect of male privilege is that women are limited. Oppression is an extremely harsh word. I'm not saying it's not a very harsh thing, but just that sometimes there's more subtle examples of oppression of women when it just could be said, no, but it's just limiting. The second thing for me, I always grew up hearing my mom say how when she grew up, she was one of 2 sisters and a brother, a very much younger brother. But when her grandmother came around, her brother would always get gifts, only the boy, because he would be the one to carry the family name. Only he would give the gifts. And then my grandmother would take the gift, if it was money, and she would split it between the 3 kids because she said that's not fair, that he would only get something. But I think it's little situations like that, little experiences and memories like that make you kind of start to look at the world in a different way. And now as an adult, you start to really experience the full grasp of what it is.
Sure, thanks, Els. And I think from my side, like Sia, I come from a family where the guy used to honestly not do anything, I'd just sit around while my sister was cleaning, and mind you, there was only 2 of us, and by the time my sister was old enough to leave the house, they got someone to help my mom, even though there's 2 other young men in the household, and so like there's 3 boys, 1 girl. And that is a family space that I grew up in. But also, when I started making sense of male privilege, of any form of male privilege, is at a later stage, I come from a family where, like our larger family, there's a lot of males. And a lot of our cultural practices are centered around the male experience. So, for instance, when we go to the graveyard, women stay behind, and the males actually go. And there is a set order of how males will proceed, will lead the proceedings, but it's centered around the males. It's centered around the men. And in trying to understand that, what I then realized was that it is so easy, because of male privilege, it is so easy to keep displaced practices when it suits the male, because in a context where you do not need women to stay over and cook and do other stuff while everyone else goes to the gravesite, had it been the males that stayed behind, we probably would have done away with that practice. In the very same way that a lot of families are now okay with getting, with getting someone to assist in closing up the gravesite, as opposed to 5 men who are there because they've got little numbers to do it on their own. So we are willing to engage culture, we are willing to engage tradition, we are willing to engage our worldview when it benefits men. Wow. But we're not willing to do it when men aren't bothered by what is happening.
And I think, as you mentioned it, Hloni, it goes back to how we as societies generally organize themselves. And one of my fundamental beliefs is that the African worldview is different from the Eurocentric worldview, in the sense that within European frames of thinking, so society is ordered around issues of competition, because life is seen as a competition for resources. And therefore, in that kind of a world, how society looks like, it ends up looking like a 100-meter race where we run from one point to the other, and he who gets there first is the winner. But in an African kind of context, there is no point to run to. Life is not seen as a way as a competition for resources, but rather it's seen as a way of how do we ensure that all of us can get as much of these resources. And I make this analogy that it's more like a round hut or a circle where the point within the African worldview is always the same, and everyone just goes around it. Whereas on the other side, it is a 100-meter dash to he who gets there first. And long and the short of it is that you create then these social hierarchies that place certain people at different spaces. And like Rebecca has said, being white means there are certain privileges she gets, but that Nan will not get, however, because they're both women. But at the epicenter of this sort of social hierarchy is the white man. And again, unfortunately, our conversation here is much like the spirit of whiteness. At no point, you can't tangibly point to the spirit of whiteness and say this is what it is. But you feel it even in its absence. And I mean, we're here gathered, we're discussing and grappling with a social system that precisely puts the white man at the top. However, none of us here fit that sort of conversation. And so the disjuncture that you experience, Loni, is out of the meeting of two different worldviews. And of course, in the meeting of those two different worldviews, in trying to make sense of the world, there's a lot of distortion. You then take principles from the 100-meter race and apply them to the circular sort of movement, and so on. So ultimately, we end up being in a space where we can't even defend our own practices because of the generational stuff and the ways in which it has shaped itself. Even the burial practices that you mentioned, Loni, again, are processes that have been deeply impacted by colonialism and colonial experiences. And I think authors like Sheikh Anta Diop kind of give us a different worldview that says, firstly, Africa from Cape to Cairo is one, culturally, but secondly, that within the African worldview, the focus is about maintaining balance, as opposed to competition.
Let me come in there, Sia, and ask this question. And I know it might be a controversial one to ask. The people sitting around this room, yes, understandably, do not necessarily represent 100% of the population, because there's other dynamics that are there. The part I struggle with, as well-read as you are, and as worldly as Hloni is, you are individuals living in the 21st century as men, who have all this knowledge, and we have, the beauty of having access to information to debunk some of these myths. And I find, I said this to a friend of mine recently, I can't believe someone who went to a private school thinks the way he thinks, because he's got access to all this information. He sees all of this. But I find that even amongst yourselves, and I use that in inverted commas, you further perpetuate this male privilege notion. Because I can guarantee you now, if somebody walked in and wanted a cup of coffee, you may not even say it, but someone's going to look at me, it's going to look at Jackie, going to look at Rebecca and Elsa, and sort of go get him the coffee, without even necessarily mouthing it. Or if someone is in the kitchen And they don't know how to figure out the microwave. I must know how to figure out the microwave because how dare I not? What kind of woman I am? So for me, I think it's good that we have this knowledge, and it's great. But I really also do blame what I would like to call my enlightened friends, who are constantly keeping the narrative that as women we should be serving you. And lastly, on this one, I think I agree with, as Elsa was talking, I remember it in high school. I mean, and we had this conversation, I think the other day. Coxted snows in winter. But for the longest while, I think it was in my matric year or maybe my standard 9 year, when we were actually allowed to wear pants, because how dare a girl wear pants at -1 degrees? But, so it's that constant thing to say, stop telling us what we should be doing to change it. Change yourselves.
Yeah,
But
and
I think that-
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, you go.
I think that we've been socialized. So for me, like there are 2 points of entry. Okay, I mean, I think that for a woman, and as a woman, and as hard as hard as it is to even say that, it's like we're talking about a subject that actually becomes very offensive, and it cuts across every cultural paradigm, in fact, So we're talking about male privilege. I mean, just even presenting the possibility that men enter this world more privileged than women becomes something very hard to swallow. I mean, that is just a reality. So we have to get through all of that before we can even get to the real issue. So we have to struggle with this. I'm not prepared to talk about that. God made me this way. I am this way. It's a gift from God. I'm more important. I get to rule. And that's how we enter everything. So can we maybe then enter the place? Because I've been thinking a lot about, we're as Christians, and our place is ultimately, our focus is in eternity. Okay, and the only thing that makes it into eternity is our soul. And the only thing that is made in the image of God is our soul. We want to put our gender in the image of God. We want to put our race in the image of God. We want to put everything in the image of God. But none of that is in the image of God. It is our soul that is in the image of God. So when you spoke, Nan, about your parents brought you up as a human, which is, so I think it brings you up from the inside out, And I think that our soul needs to grapple with our humanity. Because I think that's really where the soul does grapple. And it's able to say, we are socialized. And with all due respect, as you were speaking, we are socialized as women to please men. Whether it is we are pitted against to be the prettier one, that you get chosen, because every culture seems to choose. I don't care how actualized they are. Every culture chooses, and they have different reasons to which you get chosen. But we are socialized to be chosen, to fit into a particular role. And by the time we start to switch on the rest of us, we can actually be quite old. Unless, of course, you've been brought up with parents that have actually allowed you to move into that part of your humanity.
No, and I just think while Nan was speaking, I think that both of you actually mentioned this, is that you specifically, when you enter the world, it is difficult to self-actualize, to actually go, I was entered this world with privilege, whether that is white privilege or male privilege. And I think it is difficult to have the conversation with yourself, to educate yourself further, because you actually realize how much of it, first of all, systemic. So how much of my racism in me is systemic and because of the world I was brought up in, but also how much of it is intentional. How much of what I do, what I say is intentional racism, intentional sexism. And I think that's what you bring up, what both of you actually bring up, is that it's difficult, but actually the conversations need to happen. And I think
Rebecca, what you say, it's like, because it serves you, because it serves you. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we actually subconsciously lean into whatever serves us.
No, definitely. And I think for myself even, I never stood in school when a black classmate of mine was shouted at because of her hair color, her hair. I never stood up and said, but I have highlights. My hair's not natural. How can you say that to her even though she has natural hair? And that is me completely using the system for me. I didn't want to bring to the forefront that I've also broken the rules by having colored hair. And so I let my black classmate take a fall. That's first of all, that is my systemic racism. coming out to the forefront, and it's being able to address those things. And I think exactly what we wanted to go through a few myths around male privilege, debunking some myths around male privilege. And I think Elsie, you actually brought it up perfectly, is we teach women how to not get raped. We do not teach men not to rape women. So by telling Ilse that her dress, and we actually do this in church, I'm not, and this is not Gracepoint, I have been told I'm not allowed to preach in a dress because of my male audience. As if they've never seen kneecaps before, you know?
Now, I've had the
Yeah.
other side of things where I've been told I'm only allowed to preach in a skirt because
yeah.
it's ladylike and that's what women are supposed to do.
But it's a particular type of skirt with a particular type of length, with a particular,
Particular color, not too loud, but I just wanted to maybe, Hloni and Sia, this is where I would like maybe you guys just to bring in your understanding, is that when you see the news saying, in this last 2 weeks, 20 women have been raped, and the headline isn't 20 men raped women. I think how do we look at women murdered, not men murdered women? Because it consistently puts women as the issue. Why was she raped?
Of course.
You know, so maybe you two can maybe speak into that, because obviously we don't have.
I think one of the things, and again, you see how society's we've always been raised to frame things in ways that are beneficial to men. And of course, even in the context of South Africa, even historically speaking, the interface between the African worldview and the Christian and the European worldview took place within the institution called the church. And the institution called the church, what it did was that it recruited black men into these forms of patriarchy, which were not originally how black men understood themselves. And from that point onwards, we got a taste of what patriarchy tastes like, and we thought, hang on, this thing is actually nice. And from that kind of instant, what has then happened is that at all times, at every given point in time, women, like any other forms of oppressed people in hierarchical societies, bear the brunt of all of society, but the privilege goes to, or the benefits do not go to them. And so the kind of conversations we are having about men raping women are also fitting with that, because it problematizes the other. And the other can be black, the other can be a woman, it can be a black or woman or any other form of discrimination. But the point is, it always deflects the attention to the other. And that's why you will find the messaging constantly being that women, what was she wearing? Why was she there at that particular time? And the most interesting one that is happening with the murder of Karabo, of Tsegofatso, is that now the narrative is turning around and saying, but it was actually a woman.
I'm just going to stop you. I just want to stop you quickly, because I think Hloni and I actually spoke about this earlier, how we didn't want to get into the specific police, because of the complexities around it, and just for the respect of the families, because we don't know. But yes, I actually said to Hloni, it's just intriguing that it's a woman now. But yes.
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
But look, I must agree with Sia. Privilege is very attractive. As a man, regardless of all the complexities, let's be honest now. When you're going to taste privilege, you do not consider all these complexities. Yes, they do have a role to play, but you make a decision, you make a conscious decision to say, I want to enjoy this privilege. Let's problematize porn culture, for instance.
Go on.
It has dehumanized women for a very long time. By the time a young man grows up and he has to engage with women in the workplace, he has, for the longest of time, been exposed to women as people who are potential romantic partners, in actual fact, potential sexual partners. And so it is when all of this comes up in the news headline, I'll tell you now, men know that a lot more people are implicated in gender-based violence. A lot more men are implicated. And deep down, all of us know it. That if we were to unpack, if we were to deconstruct gender-based violence, a lot more men would be implicated.
And I think it's power, Thorny. I mean, I think it's about power. And the Me Too movement, I definitely think something is shifting. And for whatever reason, we are now shifting in a global reality now, whether it's because we have more access to one another, we have more ability to maybe study more stuff around one another, there's a bigger mirror, or whether there is a new generation of young people that are actually braver. I don't know what it is, or maybe it's a combination of everything. But with all due respect, I mean, the stuff around simple sexual harassment, simply, Ilse, your example was phenomenal. I cannot actually wear a skirt because the boys are going to look at my skirt. It's like, so that kind of thing.
And I just think quickly, when Jesus says, he said, I don't know where the scripture is, Mum, anyone's gonna have to help me, where he goes, pluck out your eyes. If you see something that leads you astray, we don't.
If you think about it, you've done it.
Yeah, and we're not going up to men who are in youth groups in here at church. We're not going, you know what? If you can't keep yourself under control, pluck out your eye. Instead, we're going, you know what, Ilse, Jackie, Nan, can you just...
But do you know why? It's because the men, firstly, the institution is male-dominated. And there's a silent culture that we know as men, as Hloni was saying, that kind of... And in that space, instead of making Hloni uncomfortable at Gracepoint, because you know that Hloni can easily back up and say, but hang on, you were doing it just the other day. And so it becomes very difficult, because we're all... And as we unravel these complexities, we all become bloody-handed. And that's what then ties us into inactivity.
I think for me, I mean, it's first of all, I think it's I agree with everything that's said. I think where it saddens me is where women are meant to dim their own light to make men comfortable. And my main experiences in the corporate world, and even on having sat on a few boards in my life, is when you walk in, I without puffing myself up, I'm as equally qualified as the people I sit around the table with. I've studied.
Puff yourself up. Go on, girl.
Go.
Puff yourself up.
I've studied at what I would call the very best universities in South Africa. And so it's immediately when I walk in, that's wonderful. But park that. You walk in and you're a woman. So then the criticism is automatic that I'm sitting around that table, not because I'm a chartered accountant with an MBA, no, and my experience. No, I'm sitting there because they needed a woman. They needed a transformation candidate.
Token.
And exactly. So then you start having, I mean, you haven't even opened your mouth. And the minute you open it, Jackie, it's almost like, oh, she's a woman. Oh. And so it's also that conditioning that it's not just in our homes, it's not just in our friendship circles, it's in our careers. So then you find, I mean, someone said to me recently, we were talking about an opportunity, and they said to me, how old are you? And I said, I'm in my late 30s. And they said, are you married? And I was like, no. And then you already see, okay, the points are being deducted. And then they said, do you have kids? And I said, no. He said, when are you planning to have kids? And I'm like, I don't know, when God blesses me. But almost the narration, or what they were trying to say to me was, oh my goodness, you're such a risky person, because what happens if you fall pregnant, which is normal in the course of most women, because now suddenly something's taken away from you. And I think we do really need and I liked, I think Rachel said it earlier, I think, Rebecca, sorry, said it earlier.
Okay, I was going to be a Rachel, so don't worry.
Yeah, she was going to be a Rachel. That's my grand's name.
So I think what you were saying earlier is, we, as much as we have these conversations, the challenge is for men to sort of say, when you think it, arrest that thought and interrogate it before it comes out, because not all women have access to these platforms, and some women are sitting in spaces that you are in, And I was sitting going, but why is Cloney asking me to make him a cup of tea when he's got his own 2 hands?
So when Daniel was born, because I have Rebecca and Daniel, when I fell pregnant with Rebecca, everybody around me, my sisters, my friends, they were like wanting boys. And their husbands also wanted boys, because like when you can shoot out a boy, it means that you've, like, that's it. And I just wanted a girl. So I just wanted a girl. And I was so happy to have had Rebecca. And I was really happy to have a boy. When I had Daniel, I was petrified to have a boy, to be honest with you. But kind of bringing up Rebecca and Daniel, it's kind of, how do you live with the male psyche? Because both of them are important. So this is not, I just hope people don't get stuck with like, this is bashing one in place of the other, because I don't think we're saying that. No. But the thing is that the minute we say anything, it sounds like that's what we're saying. We're not saying that. We're not saying you, but we are saying, and you caught me now when you said, arrest that thought. Arrest that thought. When you know that I don't have to do that because, I can enjoy this privilege. And I must be honest, as a mom, I know, like, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm embarrassed because I've spoiled both Rebecca and Daniel, but Daniel has gotten away with stuff just because he's a boy. Rebecca's just gotten away with stuff, but Daniel's gotten away with stuff because he's a boy,
I want to take us to something that you raised, and as well, Sia. You were speaking a bit about dimming your light as a woman. And Sia, you spoke about those silent narratives almost in church. And there's something that I found in my experience in the church is almost and not necessarily Gracepoint speaking, but in church circles, is that women are regarded as almost second rate because of this biblical, what you want to call it, biblical myth that is held, since we're on myth busting here. And so if you read the Genesis accounts, there are so many ways that I've heard people read this. And one of the ways I've heard people read these Genesis 1 and 2 accounts in particular is that women are shown to be inferior because they were created second. Another one I've heard is that women are inferior because they were created as the helper, which implies that you are less because you're just helping. You're not the one that needs help. And there's another way to approach it, in fact, is to say that we're created for each other. You can't have society with just women or just men. With that being said as well, you can't say that men are less because they needed a helper, because we need each other, And so what I wanted to hear from you guys, specifically, Hloni and Sia, is around some biblical myths that you've encountered in the church around, specifically around males and what informs male privilege, maybe.
And I think just, we literally have so few minutes left, but maybe you could give us that. And then my mom is quite passionate about women being the last at the cross and the first at the tomb. And so maybe like quickly we can give that, because I just want to give time to the fact that women are significant and Jesus advocated for women, loved women, and actually sought them out. So just that quickly, and then Mom and Nan, do you mind speaking on that a little bit? You go first though.
The other biblical myth I've had, which gives men the most difficulty, is this idea that you were taken out of a woman's rib.
Oh my gosh, my grandma said that to me the other night.
Because you as a man are supposed to shield a man, which is again nonsense, because no man is made as as a sort of a protector. No, that is socialization. That we say that men are protectors. No, I'm one of those guys that if you wake me up at night, I'm like, why don't you go? But the burden of patriarchy is also felt by men through these sort of subtle expectations.
No, absolutely, Vancia. And I think, one day when we have time, it would be nice to problematize Paul in some of his writing.
No, we'll leave.
I love problematizing Paul.
But look, the Bible has given us a lot of privilege as men. Or rather, how we've interpreted the Bible. How we've interpreted the Bible has given us a lot of privilege as men. How we've understood balance in a very distorted world that's about accumulating has given us, has just messed up how we view things as men. But also acknowledging that also the Bible is written or rather interpreted by others in a very primitive context. And so it makes sense for this guy who's masculine to provide and hunt for this woman who is not as masculine. but it does not make sense in a context where Elsa needs her brain to provide for herself, for her to expect me to provide for her. It just does not make sense, So, as I said, I go back to my first point. Privilege is nice. You identify it, you want to hold on to it, you want to benefit from it. And that's what we've done with the Bible.
Yeah,
and I think we've done
completely.
injustice to the Bible.
So I've been thinking about the Reformation. It was 500 years, we've celebrated the Reformation. I was thinking, here is something that's supposed to liberate us. Reformation, supposed to kind of set things right. And quite frankly, one of the things that the Reformation did is actually it locked us in. We were talking about deconstruction and reconstruction. And truthfully, it has locked us into things that have actually taken away a lot of our spiritual expressions. And one of them has actually been the role of Mary, because, it's like, it was so easy to just chuck her out. It's like, hello. And we lived with that for 500 years. Hello. Like, why? Why, of all the Reformation kind of things, did Mary just like kind of get sidelined? Because actually, like, why? Because Mary's really important. So when we study Mary, she's known as the Theotokos. She's known as the one that brings the presence of God, that she's connected to deity. I mean, we don't want to go that far because that will bring about heresy, but let's not go there. But I mean, like, you could. So the thing is, like, why could she not be? So, kind of like we begin to see that in the presence of Christ is this reordering of our humanity, and it keeps on reordering, and we see that right throughout Jesus' life. If we were to just kind of look at the Marys in his life, if we were to have a look at how he deals with the woman at the well that becomes the first evangelist, she plants the first church. If we have to look at Lydia, we look at the central focus of women biblically, but we've locked them away in a paradigm that relates to a historical view. So the thing is that here we have, going on, the men scatter and the women are waiting at the tomb. And so the thing is that we struggle, even in our church expressions, because we want to kind of look at like the rib story, which is like, come, you're a helper, get behind me. I'm like, I'm good enough because I'm behind. And so the fact is, it's this kind of just this discovery of on a deeper level. So if we can get out of the dualistic mindset, that we could actually start to kind of, there's a soulful place here. And actually, women actually bring deity in.
Yeah, and I find it quite interesting that, I've just thought of this now, so don't shoot me down, but I find it quite interesting that the woman is known as the helper, the Holy Spirit is known as the helper, and it's like this, we would never take lightly the Holy Spirit. We never speak about the Holy Spirit as this helper,
like a second-rate
thing. But Jesus speaks specifically, I'm going to be sending you a helper. Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting that why can't we see women in the same way that we view the Holy Spirit as the helper isn't this to prop men up. It's that's not what the helper is, and that's what the Holy Spirit is, Nan, I don't know if you want to give us your closing thoughts, and then we must just close off, and we have a part 2, so.
I think for me, last year, and I almost broke into a mini revival as Jackie was talking, because I wanted to hallelujah my way in. I decided to look at the women in the Bible. I haven't got through all of them yet. And it's exactly what you're saying, is so we tell the story of, I forget the guy now, but we don't, we sort of, there was Deborah, she did all these great things, but, she was almost, subservient to this person. And we speak of Lydia. But no, we'll focus on every other character in that book, and we'll just touch a little bit on Lydia. And I think perhaps it's something that, as Christians, and it's not just ministers, when we read the Bible, I liked what you said, Cloney, that a lot of the myths that we've linked to the Bible are because we've purely misinterpreted it for our own good. And I think, it's one of those things where we start being intentional about reading those women's stories and what they mean for us in our daily lives. Because I think, and I also don't, I had a moment just the same way that, Jesus came through a woman. That's how he came through, and it's something that I think in our daily lives, because I do believe Christianity is not limited to a church. We are Christians in our families, we're Christians in our workplaces. that's really what we need to start cultivating in our minds.
It's so good. I saw this meme the once that spoke about how can men hate women? You came from a woman. How can you mistreat women? There's no way of existing, without a woman. So that brings us to the end of part 1. We really want you to stay with us and stick with us for part 2. This is we got into some really deep stuff, but we're going to get into even more in the following week. So please join us, and also do not forget that we have a Bible study, well, not a Bible study anymore, a discussion group that happens on Tuesday where we dive deep and we answer some of your questions, and we just want to see where you're at. So we hope that you have an incredible rest of your week. Thank you for allowing us into your homes, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.